Hello and welcome back to the channel today. Glad you could join me this morning, where I'm still uncaffeinated and a bit drowsy. So we're gonna get into it. So I wanted to make a quick video today about just a day in the life of a cloud engineer or someone who works in IT. I don't know. I've never been a software developer professionally, so this could be totally different from being a software developer. But in IT in general, there seems to be a common theme um, when it comes to day to day life, right? So a lot of people who don't come from an IT background and maybe come from like I don't know, maybe the trades, for example, from I guess like maybe the service industry, or your essential workers, stuff like that, or come from a place where maybe a teacher. Um, it's totally different than your typical everyday 9 to 5 job. Especially now with like everything being remote, so it's a little bit different of a culture than most people are used to. So me myself, I came from a blue collar industry. I was automotive technician, and before that, I was in the army, which I would still consider among the blue collar job field. So it was a very different experience coming into like IT, cloud engineering, or software development in general. So and the first the first myth I kind of want to dispel is a lot of people, when I tell them it's like, hey, you should get into like software development or get into the IT industry. The first thing they say, if I had a dollar every time someone had told me, is like, oh man, I just don't want to sit in front of a screen for 8 hours a day. And I'm like, listen, listen, you don't sit in front of a screen for 8 hours a day. I mean, you might if you're like working at a startup, or like a very new startup, or like doing your own thing, right? But as far as like working for a company, I've rarely ever sit at a screen for 8 hours straight a day. And that's not just to say like, oh yeah, people who work in IT are lazy, but a lot of times what happens when you're working on stuff related to IT, um, is you'll kind of like get stuck, or you'll like not know how to do something. And typically the way I handle that is I remove myself from my computer entirely. So I'll get up and I'll go do something non-related. I'll go take a walk, or I'll go I don't know, just completely take my mind off of the problem for a little bit, come back, and then sure enough, uh, I end up solving the problem very quickly. So a lot of people tend to think like, "Oh man, you're going to be staring at a screen for 8 hours straight," and that's simply it's not the case. Like very very rarely am I staring at a screen for longer than at most an hour or two, unless I'm like really deep into work and I'm moving and grooving and I'm really figuring stuff out. So it's not like it's not like a lot of people think it is. It's not like I guess typical movies where people are like hunched over on their keyboards and staring at a screen all day. And maybe that's what it was like when I was in office. I don't know. I've always worked remote my entire career, so I don't know. It's very different, and that's another thing, working remote. So obviously, with most 9 to 5 jobs, you can't really work remote because you have to be there. Like if you work in the service industry, obviously you have to be there if you're like a waiter, um, or if you're like a customer service guy somewhere. Like obviously, you got to be in front of the customer to service them, right? Um, so it's not like your typical 9 to 5 job. Like it's really not. So I wanted to go over like what a typical day for me has looked like in the past, and currently looks like, depending. So I've worked at a couple different places, and both in the government space and outside of the government space. Um, so typically my day starts around. So let me give some background. I wake up pretty early, and that's just like natural for me. Like I enjoy waking up early. I'm one of those psycho people. Um, Typically, I'll wake up around like 4:30, 5 o'clock, and I'll go to the gym like in the morning. So I love going to the gym in the morning because it kind of like sets the pace for my day. So typically, I'll be done with the gym by, man, I don't know, maybe like 7:30, typically at the latest. If I'm a little bit late that day, it'll push to like 7:45 to 8, right? Um, and then after that, I come back, I walk my dogs, not a super long walk, so I'll take my dogs on a walk, and then I'll come back, I'll shower, and I'll get ready for the day. Typically, that'll all be done within an hour. So um, my work day usually starts around 9. Like typically, I'll have like a meeting or something like 9 or close to 9. Um, so I like to be pretty much ready for that meeting, even though like most of the time I'm not even using a camera or anything. I don't know. I just like to mentally prepare. Um, but I mean, so it's not like I do all this stuff like directly. You know what I mean? It's not like sequential. Like I do all these things. Like, so I'll come back from the gym and I'll like do some work for my job. Like I'll finish some stuff that I didn't finish yesterday, or just get ahead of myself. Um, and finish as much work as I can um, before I even like have my first meeting of the day. And that's kind of like the way I am. I work very efficiently in the morning. Like I'm very much a morning oriented person. So if I've got to like build another tool, I'll, write some of the Terraform code to do that, or do like a loose like plan, like a Terraform plan, like I showed in my Terraform video, which shows you what resources are going to be created, right? So if I'm building something, I'll do a quick plan, or like if there's some logs for something that's going wrong, I'll you know check out those logs, or if something I built is working correctly or not working correctly. So I'll check on stuff like that. And then I'll kind of like narrow down like what the problem is, or the next steps I have to take, and then I'll keep that in mind, and then I'll go do something else. And then I realize, like, as I go do something else, like I get ready for my first meeting, or I'll go walk the dogs, or I'll make coffee, or whatever the case may be. I realize that I start thinking, like, I kind of like get the gears turning, you know what I mean? So it kind of gets me, um, I guess, into the swing of my workday, I guess. And that's just me personally. I'm sure there's some people out there that get up, 2 minutes before the first meeting, and start the day and just, ride it out, which is fine. Like that's the great part about being in this industry is it's pretty flexible. Granted, mostly depends on where you work. So I've been at some jobs where it was like, you're expected, excuse me, you're expected to stay, um, online from, I don't know, like 9 to 5 or whatever the case may be, depending on your time zone. But for the most part, um, as long as you're getting your work done, honestly, and showing up to meetings, of course, like people kind of just leave you alone. And that was the major difference between like a service industry job or a blue collar job, is like people just leave you alone. Like they just expect you to do your job, and that's it. Like they don't really like have to sit there and like micromanage you. I mean, granted, again, this is very company dependent, but I guess I've been fortunate enough to work at companies where they're not super micromanagey. So that's a pretty positive thing in my opinion, because I think a lot of us are used to like having a boss, watching over them all day, or somebody there to like make sure that they're doing their work. And honestly, that doesn't really, in my experience, it hasn't really happened that way. You're given a task and you're expected to do that task, and if you don't, you're gonna have to kind of deal with those repercussions. It puts the accountability back on the worker, I guess. Um, so it's very different, and it was kind of a lifestyle adjustment because I came from a blue collar job where I was working at one point in time. I was working 12 to 16-hour days, and I was putting in hard work, dude. Like, if you worked a blue collar job, you understand what I'm talking about. um so uh it's very different from that, whereas the expectation is not. They realize a lot of this stuff that you're doing in IT takes a long time to do. Like, it takes a long time to just conceptualize, let alone actually show any progress. um I think normal jobs are kind of like pressuring people to just do things versus like think about things and then do them. You know what I mean? Like, if they don't see people actively working, it's like they get anxiety and they're like, "Oh, this guy's not working." Whereas in IT, it's more of like, "Okay, well, I'm gonna take an entire day to like plan how I'm gonna do this so the execution goes better," and that's a totally like normal thing to do. No one's gonna question you for like doing research on how to do something. You know what I mean? Like, that's the nature of the job. No one's going to kind of like bust your balls for not putting hands on keyboard and kind of just like, understanding everything that you need to do before you start doing it. So that's where it was a pretty pretty not difficult. It was a different world than I was used to. I was used to, like, basically working your ass off, like, physically, and not really having a lot of time to like think about things, and it's more of like doing, where this industry is completely different, and it just goes like straight into thinking about it, and then once you have a solid plan from A to B, then start executing on it. So it's a little bit different than your typical like service job, right? So another thing, a lot of people are like, again, like staring at a screen 8 hours a day. Like, I work in short bursts, like I don't sit there in front of the computer all day. Because if I do, like, I'm gonna get less done had I have just like, taken like a quick 15-20 minute break. Or, dude, sometimes I'll take even an hour to, like, if it's a really complex problem, I'm like, I just need to divorce my brain from this problem right now, and I'll come back to it. Or even like I'll do something else, like not related specifically to the problem I'm trying to solve, or the I don't know, service I'm trying to build or something like that, right? So I'll do something completely different where I'll do, like, I don't know, I'll work on like documentation or something and just take my mind away from that specific problem. Um or, like I said, I'll just completely like remove myself from the screen and then try to do something else. Um And sometimes, like, some jobs can be very meeting heavy. So like my first job was I worked in the federal space. So we all know about the efficiency of the federal government. It's not the greatest. Great people I worked with, but literally my day was filled with like meetings almost all day every day. And it was very difficult to get stuff done in between those meetings because literally I would have like 20-30 minutes in between meetings, and I'd be sitting in a you know Zoom chat or Teams chat every literally for like almost 8 hours a day. And I was like, dude, this is not great, and then I ended up moving on from that job because it wasn't very conducive to me like learning new things and kind of growing. So I kind of moved from that job, and then I got into another job, and that was very different, where I didn't have like 30 meetings a day about stuff that like definitely could have been an email. You know what I mean? um so I got into that job, and it was totally different. Like, same, like, I'm still building roughly the same things, but it's more like independent, where, you know, hey, do you have any issues today? Like, are you struggling on anything? Like, what's your progress? If not, cool. Like, we'll link up tomorrow. Just let me know, keep me posted, update your tickets, stuff like that. Where we weren't sitting in meetings for like, dude, hours a day. I'm not even kidding, like hours a day. And you know, I knew people in the industry, so I knew that wasn't like commonplace. You know what I mean? Like I knew not everybody sat in meetings all day. So I mean, I kind of knew my time was limited there, but it was like my first job in IT, so I stayed there for quite a while. I think I stayed there for almost a year. Um, and then I ended up, teaching myself more stuff and kind of moving on from that position. So I think it's very company dependent on how much screen time you're actually going to spend. So it's, like I said, if you're in a startup environment, you're going to probably spend a lot of time behind a screen because there's a lot of work to be done and there's not a lot of people to do it. So, but I mean, on the same hand, like, you're actually doing a lot of stuff. Like it's not just like checking the box, like, oh yeah, I'm here, like I'm logged into Slack or whatever. So it's very different. Um, I'm trying to think of like what else is a little bit different from like your uh typical day. So also I don't work super late. Sometimes like I have to. It depends on, what's going on, but like per project or per I don't know, launch maybe, like, if certain things are launching, you might have to work a little bit later than typically you would. Here's another thing as a cloud engineer that I wanted to bring up because I don't think a lot of people know about it, even in like as a cloud engineer. So if you're gonna do like a DevOps or like an SRE role, chances are you're probably going to be an on-call rotation. So, essentially we're working with systems that are running 24/7, 365. Like they always have to be running. It's what's called an SLA, which is like I think it stands for like service level agreement or something like that. Essentially, it's the amount of percentage of uptime that your service is guaranteed to have. Like Google, for example, has an SLA of 99 of what they call three nines, right? Which is 99.999% of the time it's going to be available. Which is wild if you think about it, because there's actual people behind like these things staying up, which is pretty crazy. So that's kind of what the on-call rotation is for, right? So depending on the size of your team, it might be, a couple hours, it might be 8 hours, it might be an hour if your team's really big, which, I haven't really been on a big team ever. So that's not the case usually. And basically your job at that time is to just put out fires and make sure that your production environment is running correctly. Um, so basically staying up, if your shift starts at like 6 p.m. and it's 8 hours, you're gonna be there from 6 to 2 a.m. 2 a.m. And granted, even that, you're not sitting in front of your screen. Like I'm not sitting in front of my screen, like uh, you know, basically, hard coding like stuff. You know what I mean? It's basically, unless I get an alert, I'm kind of like not really doing much of anything on my computer. I'm doing stuff that I want to do, or I'm doing stuff my own like personal time. I'm using that time to do other things. Or if I still have work to do during the day and I know I have an on-call shift, sometimes I'll save it for then. Sometimes I get like a second wind at night and I'll be like, you know what, I'll just, finish some work that I was doing. But I mean, there are positions in cloud that don't do on-call rotations, right? So I've been in positions where you're just responsible for building stuff, and then they get passed off to like a different team, or or you're just building an environment for a customer and you're handing it off to them. So I've been in those types of situations as well, and some people might not want to do the on-call shifts, and that's fine. You can go pretty much your entire career without doing on-call shifts if you really want. Um, I don't really mind personally. Like that's just my personal opinion. I've done worse stuff in the army, like 24-hour duty. If any of you veterans are watching, like you know what I'm talking about. So it's it's not that bad. Like compared to other stuff I've done in my life, like, dude, this is very, very laid back and it's very welcoming at this stage of my life. You know what I mean? It's a very adult job. It's a very adult job field where they're not sitting there holding your hand for everything. So I just wanted to give you guys like a general like day in the life of what my day typically looks like throughout the multiple different places I've been. And honestly, it's a common theme. It's a common theme among all of the jobs. It's a very grown up quote unquote job. Like they don't babysit you for stuff, and that's what I kind of like about it. They just, if you're performing, they kind of just leave you alone. You do your thing, be like, hey, do you have any issues? Let me know. Give us a little bit of a status update on what you're doing, and continue trucking along. So I definitely prefer that over being in the army, obviously, where it's basically adult daycare, or even working as a technician, where you always have people breathing down your back to get stuff done. And I understand that's the nature of that industry, and that's the nature of the army. Like I get it. It's just not something I wanted to do anymore, and I'm kind of glad that I ended up here in IT. But I hope this gives you a little bit of insight for my experience as a cloud engineer, and kind of how I've my experience so far. Like, granted, I haven't been in this industry too long, but I hope this gives you a little bit of insight. And if you're really hesitant because you don't want to sit in front of a screen for 8 hours a day, well, chances are you're probably not. And if you are, it's only temporary. You can always get a different job where it's not super micromanaging. Like, you got to think about the future. You can't just be like, oh, yep, this is how it is forever. And that's just simply not the case. Anyways, I keep going off on tangents. Um, you guys have a great rest of your day, rest of your morning. I'm going to end this stream here, but I hope this gave you some insight into the industry just a little bit, to kind of maybe sway your position, or persuade your decision to get into the IT industry. You guys have a good one. Peace out.